are going to start our first panel discussion, which includes distinguished speakers who will talk about the role of governments and NGOs in the issue at hand. Let me introduce the moderator of the first panel, Zsófia Tóth Bíró, who is currently working as the online editor of the Hungarian Conservative magazine, and she's been involved in this project for a very long time, so please welcome her to the floor.
Welcome to the first panel. Our first speaker will be Stephen M. Rush, Senior Fellow of Religious Freedom Institute from Washington, D.C. Please enter the floor. Sorry, I had some problem with the microphone. Everyone can hear me now. The second panelist will be Dr. El-Mustafa Rezrazi, the Executive Director of the Moroccan Observatory on Extremism and Violence. The first speaker will be Ambassador Khalid Fatah-Rahman, Head of the Center of Civilizational Dialogue at the Islamic World Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. And finally, Péter Kovács-Pivka Péter, Director General of Hungary Helps.
Good morning, all. It's great to be here. I flew in yesterday from the U.S. As Secretary Azbej said, it's really wonderful to be here at a situation where there's so many of us who have worked together for a long time on the front lines of these issues. From here, I go to Abuja in Nigeria, where amongst the work that's being done there are some fantastic projects being funded by the government of Hungary. Singular projects in the respect that they are being funded directly to the dioceses themselves, in this case, the Diocese of Sokoto, which belongs to Bishop Kuka up in the northwest, and the Diocese of Yola up in the northeast. Again, projects funded directly by the government of Hungary. Following on the initial programs, the first programs in Iraq that the Hungarian government supported directly to the church, in which Tristan and I worked closely together, was the saving of the town of Teleskov. And I'm going to show you some pictures of that if we can. Okay, they're already up here. I'm going to show you 6 pictures here before we start. I have 20 minutes, and I'm going to have to really motor through things pretty quickly. We'll touch on a few topics, but a picture's worth 1,000 words, and in the case of what happened in Iraq and Christian persecution around the world, the right picture worth 10,000 words. So I'm going to show you 6 pictures here real quickly. These are all pictures that I took in the aftermath of the ISIS war, or during the ISIS war, as the towns were recovered by the coalition forces, the church sent in teams of priests, small teams, 2-3 priests, and myself. I was living with the priests for the duration of the war. And our role was to go in and document the situation as quickly as we could after ISIS was forced out, so we could check on the status of the church properties and also the status of the towns. One of the primary concerns we had was properly documenting what had happened before it was adulterated or changed or affected in any way. One of the other concerns we had was to be a prevention to looting that might go on, so that we would be able to say, okay, look, we know what those towns looked like in the first 24 hours after ISIS left. We expect them to not look differently from that when the people are allowed to come in subsequently. So with that, I'm going to show you 6 pictures here. The first of these, this is Father Thabat. He's in the town of Karamdes, in the Iraqi sector. This is just outside of Mosul. This is his church, Mar Adai, as we came into it, this is what we found. And you can see this statue of the Virgin Mary, which had, prior to the war, been placed up to the right, up on a pedestal, but had been removed by ISIS and placed in front of the altar intentionally destroyed, shot up, and the statue of the Virgin Mary decapitated, hands cut off. This was intentional. This is Father Thabet. This was a day after ISIS had been removed from the town, and this is his reaction. I should say that Father Thabet has a happier ending than this. He survived the war and is now the Bishop of Alkosh. Okay. This is in the town of Batnaya, just a few miles up the road from Teleskov. This is in the chapel of the Virgin Mary there. And again, you can see the calling card that was left behind by ISIS. Again, we saw this in every place that we went to, which is the decapitation and the cutting off of the hands from the Virgin Mary. If you'll notice there on the left, see I have my monitor down here, great. If you notice there on the left, there's some graffiti written on the wall there, and I'm going to switch to that just now. There we go. Okay. Interesting. For those of you who speak German, we'll read this right away. This is graffiti left behind by German-speaking ISIS fighters. I'll let you contemplate on that for a bit. It's another subject, but be that as it may, what it says for those of you who don't speak German, "O you slaves of the cross, you have no place here in the land of Islam. Either get out of here now, or we will kill you." This is the type of graffiti that the returning Christians were confronted with throughout northern Iraq as they came back into their towns. This one is particularly interesting by the nature that it is in German. So what you have here are German immigrants to Germany, learned German, came back to use that knowledge in a different way. So, here we go. All right. Secretary Azbej spoke about funding directly to trusted partners and how one person can make a difference. Here we have Father Salar Kayo, the priest of Teleskov and Batnaya. This picture is taken in the early spring of 2017. So the war against the coalition offensive against ISIS began in 2016. And by early 2017, these towns, Batnaya and Teleskov, had been recovered. And so here you have a priest together with some of the young men of the town, and they're deciding how they are going to rebuild their town. It's interesting because the reason that they're deciding how they are going to rebuild their town, Teleskov and some of the areas around Batnaya, is because they were empowered by the Hungarian government to be able to do so on their own. What you don't see in this picture is any outside aid organization from the US, from the EU, from the UK, or any place else standing around telling these people what they should be doing in their homes, in their towns, which before the arrival of ISIS, they in fact had built on their own. So this is an interesting thing here. Secretary Azbej spoke about the difference of one person. Let me switch. There we go. It's another picture of Father Salar. Father Salar is standing now over the town of Teleskov, successfully rebuilt and re-inhabited in a period of about 60 days because of the generous grant directly from the Hungarian government to the church there in Iraq. And he's standing there looking out to the south of his town, and he's looking towards what are now the front line between the Kurds and the Iraqis. What happened after this town was rebuilt, the Kurds and the Iraqis decided they wanted to continue fighting. I won't get into it, it's complicated. But just a week before this picture was taken, the Iraqi government had told Father Salar, you need to get all the people out of that town. We are going to begin shelling it with heavy weapons in 24 hours. Father Salar said this town was rebuilt with no help at all from the Kurds or the Iraqi government. It was rebuilt by our own people with support from the government of Hungary. And if you are going to shell it, you're going to have to kill us. We're not leaving. So with that, he got the help of the U.S. government to intervene with the Iraqi government, and an uneasy truce was achieved. But you talk about the difference of having one person of courage being able to stand, one person being empowered and being supported. In this case, again, the Hungarian government supported the church through the church, Father Salar, and that town, in the absence of Father Salar, in the absence prior to that of the Hungarian government in providing for relief, wouldn't exist. The Iraqis were prepared to shell it. The Kurds had set up defensive positions in all of those houses that you see along that perimeter road. The Kurdish government had set up defensive positions inside those homes, and they were all going to be shelled. Last picture. Easter 2017, the town of Teleskov, people have returned. They're having Easter celebration. They're having Easter celebration in Teleskov. The people were able to come back and do that. Why were they able to do that in Teleskov and not in most of the other towns in northern Iraq? For the simple reason that the people in Teleskov had received early and unique aid. I'll talk about that in just a second, but early and unique and effective aid from the government of Hungary. They went back in, they recovered their town. It remains a Christian town to today, and they were able to celebrate Easter there in 2017, just months after the removal of ISIS. So with that as background, again, I don't have a lot of time here, but what I just want to speak about in terms of governments and institutions, and specifically successes and failures. Again, it's a big topic. It could be expanded. I think it is an issue absolutely deserving of substantial independent analysis and critical analysis. But in terms of responses by governments, and big institutions, there's really two things that in my years of working on this, which is back since 2014 now, but there's really two things that have really struck me as being needed. And the first of these is an honest recognition of what is the issue that you're facing. You've seen these photos here now. You see the graffiti that's left behind. It's clear that what that issue is all about. And yet, time and time again in the West, we want to obfuscate that and call it something different. We want to call it violent extremism or some other thing, except what it is. Except what it is. And this harms everybody. It harms the people who are affected by it. It harms the people who may need to adjust some things in terms of how they've been managing their societies and whatnot. So it doesn't provide any help to anybody at all, and more often it simply hinders the ability of people to move forward in a meaningful basis. The second of these is the urgency and the manner in which the aid is delivered. Is it being delivered in a way that actually is intended to get at the people and affecting the people and helping the people? Or is it meant to be delivered in a way that furthers the political and social objectives of the donors? The current international aid paradigm that we have, especially as it tries to address issues of violence against minorities, whether they're Christians, Yazidis, Uyghur Muslims, or whatever, that whole aid paradigm that we have now is a politically driven, process-driven paradigm in which the aids of the donors and the implementing agencies are foremost. And the impact that it has on the people themselves, those who are most affected, the people who are the victims of this violence, is an incidental concern. Effectively, it's an incidental concern. And all you need to do is look at the lack of efficacy of these programs, and it proves the point quite clearly. So, what we saw time and time again, we would see large aid donors, whether it be through the UN, through USAID, so all the big groups, including some of the private ones, they would come in and say, okay, here's how we're going to save you. Your people need to do this, and this. We don't care if it effectively changes who they are. That's their problem. If they want this aid, this is what they're going to have to do. By the way, we're going to send our experts over there to oversee the whole thing, and they're going to account for 60% of this budget. I'm not joking. I wish I was. I wish I was joking when I say 60%. In some cases, it's more than that. It's routinely over 50% when we're speaking about the UN. No one wants to discuss this publicly, but it's routinely over 50% in terms of where those aid dollars go when you're discussing this with these major international aid programs. So they would come to us with this, and we would say, well, thank you very much, but really, it's not working. It doesn't work. You're asking the people who have already been brutalized to give up who they are in order to receive this money, allegedly from you, which at the end of the day is not even going to reach them. Okay, so no surprise, failure. It's slow in arriving, it's ineffective in delivering, it's a broken international aid paradigm. There is absolutely an international aid industry that exists, and that paradigm is continued in order to support that industry, not primarily to help the people involved. Contrast success. Success looks like the Hungarian model that we showed you here. The Hungarians came, and one of the people that was unmentioned here, the Hungarians had a uniquely effective consul general in Iraq during the time of the war, Consul General Shaba, who I believe is back in the military now, and hopefully I'll see him again sometime, but a wonderful man. Believed deeply in the character and the promise of the Iraqi Christians. And together with Hungary Helps, we were able to work out this model that said, okay, let's see what we can do directly. So together with Secretary Azbej and other members of Hungary Helps, we put together this model. They funded directly to the church in Iraq. And what did we do with that? We saved these towns. And it was so effective that the American Consul General's office looked at us and said, how'd you guys do that so fast? And I said, well, it's really simple. The Hungarians trusted and respected the local people themselves, and they empowered them to save their own towns. It's not complicated. And in fact, I think I can get you a copy of the contract that we signed with them if you'd like to see it. And so I went back to to Secretary Azbej and I said, look, can we show this contract to the people at the U.S. consulate and to the people at AID, because they don't believe we were able to do this so quickly. And so we did. So right now, the United States government has a copy of this contract, so they have the model to go by if they want to follow up on it. And to show how good this model was and is, when the Knights of Columbus, who were one of those Catholic aid organizations primarily responsible, along with Aid to Church in Need and some others, for saving Christians at the end there, when the Knights of Columbus wanted to save a town, they said, how should we do this? And I said, well, you should use the Hungarian model. They said, we thought that. Can we look at that contract? So the Knights of Columbus, several months later, made a donation, about $2 million, to the town of Karamnes. That was the town of Father Thabit, who you saw there in the first picture with in the Church of Mar Adai. So we did a second project based on that Hungarian model. This time the donor was the Knights of Columbus. Same result. Within 60 days, the town was secured, the town was recovered, and both of those towns, Karamdes and Teleskov, are success stories. They are uniquely success stories in compared with other Christian towns in northern Nineveh, so many of which are in very, very difficult shape, and in fact, unfortunately, probably lost because the help that they received came through the existing paradigm, which means it was late, it was implemented poorly, and it very rarely got to the problem involved. So I don't want to take up, we've got a lot of other qualified speakers here. I need to finish up. I think this whole topic of efficacy of aid, there's a new pathway that's been demonstrated here. It's by the Hungarian model, which we call it the Hungarian model. It's been tremendously effective, and our hope is that out of this conference, some momentum can be generated to see that this model gets effectively studied, empirically studied, and compared to the other paradigms that exist out there. Because at the end of the day, as Pope Francis, my boss, says, it's about people, not projects. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the amazing presentation. Mr. Azbej, please enter the floor.
So my name is Mustafa from Morocco. First, I would like to express my deep thanks to Danube Institute, Jeffrey and his team, and to all of you for this opportunity, which is very, very important issue. And I hope that we can see the output of your field works coming out soon in a book. This is very important. So my views will be with too much academics. I'm not familiar. I will try to be short in 15 minutes. And I would like just something very important was mentioned by Stephen, because talking about this issue of NGOs, charity, and humanitarian support, it's very important. And I wish we can have a specific or special conference on that, because when we change the context, it's very complicated. At least in Morocco, for instance, I mean, the decision to fight violent extremism was based on making prohibition against any non-state actors' charity. And this is very important because in terms of law, okay, if you are in EU, I mean, there is a hegemony, but if you go to Middle Eastern countries, if you make a permission, a group to be in action, many religious groups, you cannot say these groups can do it and those cannot do it. So this issue is very, very, I hope that we can brainstorm it, because Middle Eastern countries needs to exchange over this experience. The Hungarian experience can be very useful, and I am very happy to learn that there is a state department taking in charge this issue. At least it will reduce this, what I used to call the industry of NGOs. And this is, unfortunately, we cannot talk about it sometimes. It's a taboo. If you criticize NGOs, so it's not good. So maybe we need to do that once. Today, I would like just to share with you some reflections based on my experience during the last 10 years, mainly during the last 5 years as a clinical psychologist in charge of accompanying prisoners from ISIS. And I've seen like more than 500, worked with them. And there is some insights related to our institute's research, what we used to call it the para-religious factors, which means some factors which are not religious, but they are dressed with religion. And sometimes it gave or it increased this Christianophobia, Islamophobia that we don't need in our job. So basically, I will not stop too much on definitions. And basically, if we would like to, after readings, most of the literature of ISIS, we can find those dreams, 4 dreams, and 10, grievance or wounds. And this was a relevant theory of our colleague from Morocco, Professor Ahmed Abadi. He's the Secretary General of the Rabita Muhammadiyya of Ulama. So he identified 4 dreams in the literature of ISIS: the dream of unity, the dream of dignity, the dream of purity, and the dream of salvation. And you can see in those dreams there is a mixture between religious, between history, between colonialism, and between also the identity fabric. They are not pure religious dreams. And on the other side, we have 10 grievances that we can find in the global literature produced either by Al-Qaeda and later on by ISIS. The first one is that the West was in conspiracy against the Muslims. This is one item you will find it in all those literatures as a driver to invite or to recruit young people. The second one, the grievance of colonialism, a historical fact. And of course, the interpretation of those extremist groups to use it for recruitments. The second one is the issue of Palestinian issue, the conflict between Palestinian and Israelis also instrumentalized in recruitment. And the other one is the grievance of cultural and moral uprooting, the grievance of Iranian expansion or the Shia expansion, the grievance of Molotov cocktail, what has happened in Afghanistan, in Iraq, the grievance of double standards in international relations, the grievance of humiliation. This is something internal, which means this alliance between those colonial powers and regimes, and the grievance of the falsification of history and geography. And the last one, which we have experienced during the last 10 years in Europe, the grievance and how it was instrumentalized by those violent extremist groups, is the insulting of the Prophet and the burning of Quran. But there is another grievance that people do not talk about it, is those personal psychological drivers that search for religious dressing to hide their complexity. So at the end of the day, if you are looking to this, religion is almost absent. But we are inviting religions just as a dress to use it because it's very useful for mobilization of young people, very useful in media, very useful in, in advocacy at large. So when we look also to another part of the factors of violence or the recruitment within young community, we found school break, most of the people, I mean, at least if we take the case of Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, that I do know well, we have almost more than 70% people, they left the school, I mean, before getting to the college, to the secondary level. Unemployment, family breakout, divorce, or the stepping back of the role of the parents. Shanty towns, I mean, as a socio-economic. Mental health, well, emotional, mental, and behavior, but it doesn't go beyond more than 7%. And of course, we were too much astonished that the companionship came to the top, which means in the same age, one recruit another. So which means that the functionality of the family, of the school, of the media, they are not that much important today. So the companionship comes first. The second one is the social media. Then after that, those physical elements comes. And this is something very important. They are changing all what has been said during the last 15 years, including, I mean, what was said in the States, Mark Seligman or Gerald Post and others. So today we found ourselves that we need to review the literature to understand those drivers of extremism and production of violence. Well, at least here, for instance, if we would like to look at this picture and how ISIS, what are the enemies of ISIS, we will find that the Christians, they are related to Salibiyun, Crusades, and this is including two factions. The first one, the minorities, that previous speakers talk about it extensively. And the second one is the West as a whole. But they are not only Christians who are targeted by violence. We can find other groups, I mean, including, the Shia, including the non-religious leaders, regimes, including even Islamic groups. They call them Murji'ah. So those who report the Islamic project, those who refuse to go to violence, so also they are a subject of violence. So, which means that there is not this symmetry of Islamic violence groups against Christians. It is not that much automatic. So Christians, they are a part of a violence project that can include everyone almost. Well, in Morocco, it's very specific. Of course, Morocco cannot be that much central in this discussion just for the fact that we have less than 2%, I guess, of Christians in the community. Almost 1.1 of Jews, and the others, they are, Moroccan believers, Muslims. But we do have a system, very interesting system, named the Commander of the Faithful, Amir al-Mu'minin, who is the king. But it's very interesting. He's not the commander of Muslims. He's the commander of believers, including Christians and Jews. And it was very clear, even, in the Constitution of 2011. So I guess this experience is very interesting. It's very specific in the Middle East. Of course, we cannot bring it or export it, unfortunately. But it's very interesting because with the status of a commander of the faithful, he is a political leader first. And the second, he's the leader of the Muslims. And this picture is once a year, he's gathering religious scholars from all the Muslim world. In Ramadan for they call it, Hassaniya seminars. So it's every year, so the name of his father. And of course, this is the school including, it's the first time that we are including women as religious actors. And definitely something very important. We were talking about NGOs, maybe we need to talk also, what about to genderize the religious act? So at least in the Moroccan experience, since we include women as leading actors in mosques, we feel that their impact is more than double than what the man can do in terms of, how diffusing the culture of tolerance. So their impact is very, very important than we can do, we men. So here also, there is a huge concern of the commander of the faithful of the Moroccan state to care about the Jew community. Not only in those official meetings, but also in act, taking care of their space of cult, taking care of their sponsorship, taking care about their well-being. But close to that also, there is a huge care and communication between the Pope Francis and the Vatican at large, and the commander of the faithful. Maybe it's very interesting. This is, of course, the legal foundation of that. It's based on the Constitution. It's legally established. And of course, here later on, if you wish, there was a wonderful mixture of a cultural show between Christians, Jew and Muslims singing together in front of the Pope Francis during his visit 3 years ago to Morocco. So, what are the keys to go beyond this issue? I suggest two, and I will be short. Please stop me once if you feel I go. The first one is the theory of black wisdom, white wisdom. And this is an outcome of a research project to which I was a part of at Philadelphia University about, the geography of wisdom. And we came out that all groups, including violent groups and non-violent groups, they are sharing a part of wisdom. Which means that if you ask me, or you ask one of our colleagues, what about justice? Yes, it's a value we defend, all of us. Even if you ask Bin Laden, he will not say no. He believes that what he's doing, that he's looking for justice. And this is the difference. So the wisdom is here, but either it is white or black. So which means that the terms to reach the wisdom, it's problematic, not the values. And this is very important in terms of dialogue, interfaith dialogue. Maybe we don't need to talk or to make dialogue over the content, but we should talk about about the means, how we approach the realization of those values. This is what I would like to say by this. The second one is the theory of joint area of cooperation outside religion. And here, I will go to the point. So, for example, this is also an emerging theory today in the interfaith dialogues. Maybe we can, instead of discussing religion, we can work together on projects, like projects related to earth, value of project to protect the environment, which is a common value between all religions, and it can be directed to drive people to work on those areas, which are also areas neglected sometimes by state actors. The second is humanitarian action, so like aid, disaster risk reduction. So those areas can be very important to train those volunteer NGOs and religious NGOs to work on those issues. And the last one is peace building, peacekeeping, and of course, peace prevention. So these are, I guess, discussion that we did have 2 years ago with a Christian center in Switzerland, and they are advancing their research on this area, how maybe we should convert the interfaith dialogue from the traditional format, talking about history, talking about grievance, talking to a prospective project that, I mean, different actors can work on, and it is very tangible in terms of assessment and output. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Azbej. Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Well, assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. I'm Ambassador Khalid. I'm director of the Center of Civilizational Dialogue in the ICESCO. I would like to begin by thanking Professor Jeffrey and his team for the invitation. Actually, I have been asked to speak on the role of the ICESCO, the Islamic World Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Operation, to curb violence and counter radicalization in the Islamic world. Firstly, we should start with the fact that violence and radicalization are global phenomena. It seems like immature and primitive statement, but we used to depend on it in order to say that curbing violence and countering radicalization effectively will require global cooperation in that terms. Secondly, we must also sieve out the rules on the roots of or causes of the violence and radicalization in the order to create potent and sustainable solution, being that such causes are often multifarious and multidimensional. There is no one-size-fits-all solution for violence and radicalization. It could be anything from economic deprivation, social injustice, political turmoil, educational deficit, legacy of colonial history, and it still has its impact on our countries, the colonial dimensions, especially the Palestinian issue, it is still there. And also, we have to say that we should bear in mind that violence in the Middle East specifically does not differentiate between Muslims and Christians, as per most of the violence cases and attacks targeted and still targeting selected Muslim societies or groups in different ways for different reasons and with different tools. Fourth, it's very important to continue our concerted and coordinated efforts to reflect and portray Islam not just as a religion of peace, but also a religion that keeps the peace. Islam is also a religion that is tolerant, inclusive, and pluralistic. The diversity of the Ummah concept of strengthening is by saying, united we stand, divided we fall. It's not for only for the Muslims, but for the societies that can work together. At this juncture, allow me just to share with you the role of the ICESCO experience. First, we have to talk about the new phase and era of the ICESCO. It started in January 2020 with an openness new approach that the Islamic World Organization for Science, Culture, and Education is not only for the Islamic countries as membership. The door is open for non-Muslim countries to join the organization as observatory countries in that membership. And it gives huge opportunities to exchange ideas with non-Muslims. We started with some, I'd like to be very quick, with some efforts. The international, we made some conferences, some seminars, we published some books just to show the tolerant and the peaceful ways of the ICESCO that depending on. We held the international conference on the Prophet Syria. We started by the International Forum on the role of religious leadership in the face of crisis, which brought together a large number of prestigious authorities, institutions, and intellectual figures from around the world to discuss the prospects of joint action between the different religious leaders and institutions across the world. The International Conference on the Prophet Sirah was another occasion to bring people around the world together and anchor the culture of dialogue and peace. That international conference was attended by some presidents, like President of Nigeria, Prince Charles of Wales, and Imran Khan, Prime Minister of Pakistan, and other prestigious leaders. On the one of the recommendations of that conference, actually, of the Ummah and Prophet Sirah, we recommended an initiative submitted to the 48th session of the Council of Foreign Ministers of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, held on March 2022 in Islamabad, Pakistan, under the name that International Day of Mercy. The International Day of Mercy was launched in a ceremony in the ICESCO headquarters to promote the values of grace and mercy among all nations and among all peoples and culture. The 21st of April of each year is now recognized as International Day of Mercy due to the efforts made by the ICESCO. Our efforts to promote peace, harmony, and dialogue were also made through the means of artistic ceremonies. The organization celebrated World Poetry Day in 2021 under the theme of Poets' Wings of Peace. And last but not least, the second international conference on countering violence, extremism was held in the ICESCO. That was attended by Dr. Jeffrey and was sort of cooperation with Dr. Razazi Center, one of the most important steps of the ICESCO on the path of curbing violence. We published some books very important on that realm. Jurisprudence of Peace by Sheikh Yaqoubi, Encyclopedia of Occidentation, Promoting Civilization Concepts, and German Orientalism in the Middle East. That is a new book is being published. And our second emphasis on science and technology, that because of science and technology has got the natural and neutral nature of building nations. If we depend on having these steps towards enhancing and building the themes of technology and science, we can have it as a fruitful means for curbing violence in the area. Our third emphasis on intercultural dialogues and civilizational diplomacy, given the fact on plurality, modernization, and inclusivity, these are useful against violence, radicalization, and extremism. Our newly established Center for Civilizational Dialogue is at the forefront of ICESCO, one of the more prominent steps establishing this center. And now we are dealing with a new concept in the Center for Civilizational Dialogue, that is civilizational diplomacy. We are going to launch with the United Nations these concepts very recently. Our last emphasis is the upliftment of Muslim communities outside the Islamic world. If they are inspired, motivated, and empowered, their members are less attracted by radicalization, and focusing on youth is a priority for us as they are more vulnerable to external influences. We should continue to look for non-violent solution to violent problems, as they can also be effective as soft power mechanism. We've got a lot to say, but I'm not going to take more than that. Thank you for hearing me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. Last but not least, please welcome Mr. Kovács Pivka on stage.
Okay, very good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Kovács Pivka. I am the head of the Hungary Helps Agency, which is the implementing agency, the implementing body of the Hungary Helps Program. The State Secretary, Mr. Tristan Azbej, maybe told a lot about the Hungary Helps Program. There is only one thing which I would like to emphasize here, and this is a very important feature of our program. It's that our program is inclusive, very inclusive. Although his title, the State Secretary's title, is that he is a State Secretary for Persecuted Christian Programs. However, the Hungary Helps Program supports not only the persecuted Christians, and whenever we support Christians or Christian institutions, we pay very strongly attention that our support needs to be inclusive and the institution needs to be inclusive as well. Why is it important? It's important because there must be a coexistence between the different ethnic groups, religious groups. Otherwise, the long-term peace will not be established, and that's very important. So this is the reason why we started to support Christian organizations, because what we saw is that the Christian organizations are very inclusive. And in my presentation, I am going to give you some examples how we do that, how we try to make sure that our support is gone to all different groups, no matter what is the religion, what is the ethnicity, because what we see is that violence and suffer has no religion. So therefore, we try to promote this coexistence. And maybe in that way, my presentation will be a little bit different than the previous presentations, because I am trying to deliver you a positive message. The positive message is that this coexistence exists, and it needs to exist in order to establish this long-term peace. So, through a couple of interesting projects and types of projects, I am trying to give you some example of this. One is that the reconstruction. For us, it is very important to rebuild schools, to rebuild healthcare facilities, to rebuild even towns in the Middle East, and also in Africa, because in Africa they suffer a lot as well. I heard the story of Tel Askuf, which is one of our projects that we are the most proud of. The reason is that a whole town can be rebuilt with the help of the Hungarian government. And this rebuilding was very significant, because although the majority of this town is Christian, in Tel Askuf not only Christians live, neither in the surroundings and in Tel Askuf, because there are a lot of new or rebuilt facilities such as schools, such as doctor's office, etc. Also the surroundings can use it. no matter to which religion they belong to. And here I would make a remark, because usually in the Middle East we talk about Christians and we talk about Muslims, but the variety of the people there is more colorful. So there are the Yazidis, for example. In this area there are different villages, one Christian village, one Muslim village, one Yazidi village, another Christian village, another Yazidi village. So it is very important that these people need to work together, need to live together. So in this project, we try to help in this as well. And it was good to see that when the construction happened, the workers were not only Christians. The majority of them were Christians, as in the town, the majority of them are Christians. However, not only and not exclusively. I try to demonstrate to you another project, and I would like to ask you to pay attention to the two pictures in the bottom. We are in Homs, in Syria. In Homs, there is a district called Hamidaya. 600,000 people lived in this district before the fight started. And now it's almost empty. It was very sad when I was there. It was a year ago. You have seen in the two bottom pictures 2 rebuilt flats. You see that the walls are different. The walls are white instead of the other ones which are ruins. In this project, we worked together with the Maltese Order. They selected the right flats that could have been rebuilt. Not all of them were able to do that, unfortunately. They selected also the families who still lived in Syria and who wanted to return and who were the most needy. And with the help of the Hungarian government and with the help of the local people, the Maltese Order rebuilt more than 200 houses. Not only the Maltese Order do that, so some other Christian organizations and international organizations like SOS Chrétien d'Orient from France, for example, they also rebuilt some flats in this area. Why is it interesting? Because they didn't make any differentiate if the families were Muslims or Christians. When I was there, I also met Christian families as well as Muslim families who returned to their original places. They were all thankful to the Maltese Order, to the Christian government, and they were peaceful people. And the others saw that. The others saw that Christian people and Muslim people could live in the same apartment, not in the same apartment, in the same building, in different apartments, and it works. It was a very remarkable experience for me. Just one more story. It's not on the picture, but also in this area, I saw some cemeteries that were bombed. And when I asked the locals why they bombed the cemeteries, I didn't know what was the reason. And they told me the story that the reason was that when the bomber pilots got the command to bomb inhabited areas, instead of that, they flew over the cemeteries and bombed the cemeteries, not to harm anyone. So it's just one thing. That was something that demonstrated to me that even in the most violent times, humanity and mercy exist. We also invest a lot in education. And education is maybe one of the best sectors to promote the peaceful coexistence between people, because in most of the schools that we support, and this applies mostly for Christian schools, Muslims and Christians study together. Even in Erbil, when I was in one of the schools of the bishop, it's a Bishop Warder school, I met not only students, but I also met teachers who were Muslims and Christians, and they worked together. And another interesting fact that it was last December when I first met Father Jamal Kader, who is the new vicar of Amman, and he told me the story that the Vicariate of Amman is the biggest school maintaining organization in the neighborhood, not only in Jordan, but also in Palestine. And what I didn't know before, and it was quite surprising for me, but very positively, that the vicariate maintains schools even in the Gaza Strip. Just imagine that there is a Christian maintained school in the Gaza Strip with only Muslim students and Muslim teachers. Very interesting, and I think that this is one of the reasons why education is the best. And it also applies for healthcare, because also sick people, no matter what religion they are following, when they are sick, then they need doctors. So this is why we support, one of the reasons why we support healthcare institutions in the Middle East and also in Africa. And it's very interesting that Yazidis, for example, who are maybe even more persecuted than the Christians in some ways, when they have a medical office in their villages, Muslim patients and Christian patients very often visit it. Also the St. Joseph Hospital in Erbil. This is one of the biggest hospitals there, and they provide free medicaments to Muslims, to Christians, to everyone, and therefore all the religious groups very often visit it. Another story which is quite interesting for me, or which was quite interesting, maybe some of you know that there is an eye clinic, a Hungarian eye clinic in the Congo Democratic Republic. It is run by Father Richard Hardy, who is an eye doctor, and he is the only eye doctor for 9 million people in Africa. In this area, Christians and Muslims and some people who are following tribal religions live together. And when was the inauguration of the new building of this eye clinic, there was one guy from the Belgian humanitarian agency who came to visit the event, and he told me that he worked with the Belgians, he worked with the Dutch a lot, and always the best contacts for them, the best partners were the bishops and the Christian churches. And I don't know, it took approximately 5 minutes while he was talking about the Christian churches and how good relationships he had with them. And the inauguration, the event started with the Mass. And the guy stood next to me, and I asked him whether he was Protestant or Catholic. He said, "Oh, none of them, I'm Sunni." Where we also provide some funds is the preservation of cultural heritage, because cultural heritage is important for everyone. And nevertheless, cultural heritage is something that can produce income because it has touristic value. And therefore, everyone who is working there can produce some income for their families. One of the cultural heritage sites which I wanted to show you is the monastery of Kara. Kara is a little town next to Homs, and it's a Sunni town. It's next to the highway between Homs and Damascus. And just imagine that during the war, one side was occupied by al-Nusra, the other side was occupied by ISIS. They fought each other and they fought everyone, basically. The town is Sunni, the monastery is Greek Catholic. Once it happened that the Islamic State, ISIS, wanted to occupy the monastery and destroy it, and the only reason why they couldn't do that is because the inhabitants of the village, the Sunni people, protected the monastery against the Islamists. There were a lot of pictures of the victims at the entrance of the monastery, and most of them are not Christians, most of them are Sunni people. And when I entered the monastery, you see the courtyard of the monastery. I was able to take a photo. I was allowed to take the photo from this side. However, they asked me not to take a photo if I turn. And I asked them why. And they showed me a nest of fighters. And I asked them who they were. And they said, that's Hezbollah. Okay. And I asked them, what Hezbollah is doing in this monastery? And they told me, of course, they protect the monastery. As a summary, what I wanted to tell you is that there are many ways how the different religious groups live together, work together, and fight for a better future together in the Middle East. And if they do so, and if we support those communities where it is possible, then there is hope for sustainable peace in the Middle East. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much. It is time to give the audience the floor. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand, and my colleague will give you the microphone. Is there any questions?
This question is directed at Stephen. Regarding the two villages which have been restored through the Hungary Helps Program, what is being done in terms of protecting them? Because I would think they would be a target for resurgent ISIS.
This is, okay. It's a good question. Northern Iraq is still in a complicated situation in terms of its security. There are two sectors, the Kurdish sector and also the Iraqi sector. And the Iraqi sector is controlled by a mix of Iraqi federal forces and also different militias. And that situation changes. So the security situation in those areas changes. And one of those towns, Karamdes, is in that area. So today it may be under the control of the Iraqi federal forces, or tomorrow it may be primarily under the control of some of the other different factions, primarily Iranian-backed factions. So those security situations there around Karamdes are less certain, and it's an issue. The other town, Teleskov, is in the Kurdish sector and is somewhat more stable. The biggest problem both of those towns face is the one of livelihoods for the people. So the towns have been preserved, security generally maintained, although in a somewhat precarious state. But the biggest issue confronting these towns now is livelihoods for the people. You know, the towns were preserved so that they could go back, but they need to have jobs. And the economy has just been destroyed. It's been destroyed since the end of the ISIS war, which was essentially 2018, and then followed, you know, shortly thereafter by COVID, which the whole world is dealing with. But these towns on the periphery, it's not just the Christians' towns, it's a huge problem in Mosul, which is not far from either of these two towns. This issue of livelihoods for the people to be able to rebuild is really the primary one right now.
Thanks so much. I'm a researcher of the interreligious dialogues, and my question concerns Director Azbej and Ambassador Fatah Rahman, both of yours, for the dialogues between different civilizations are generally distinguished as interfaith and interreligious dialogues. And how can you emphasize the importance of the interreligious dialogues? Because in my opinion, the interfaith dialogues is very important in theoretical aspect. For instance, the great university, the Al-Azhar, has a research group on interfaith dialogues. It's well known for everybody, or for us. Albeit, after your both excellent lectures, are more convinced that the significance of the dialogues between different civilizations and cultures has more importance in pragmatic aspect, in not only in peacemaking, but in everyday life. And that's why I would ask your opinion on emphasizing the interreligious discourses interface. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Actually, as I mentioned, we have very recently established the Center for Civilizational Dialogue. And we started with very important conference for the religious leaders. Those were not only Muslims, there were Christians, Jews, and other leaders of other religions. Actually, that conference was very important to address the new approach of the ICESCO, that we tend to have others on board with us in enhancing the themes of interfaith dialogue. We've got sort of partnership with centers for interfaith dialogues as Qasid in Saudi Arabia, King Salman Center for Interfaith Dialogue. We tend to have a partnership with so many centers around the world in that we are new in our steps, and we promise that these steps can build a very constructive idea in the future. Thank you.
Okay. I guess that the interfaith dialogue is a very complicated issue. So at least I will tell you my very modest experience. In 1999, when I was in Princeton, I got across Huntington. I was visiting him many times in Harvard. So at that time, he launched his famous book. It was almost 7 years that he launched it, Clash of Civilization. And I was very concerned to understand the mapping he has done. So at that time, I was also based in Japan. And I was working in a joint project of Doshisha University, the chapel. It's a Christian university and monotheistic religious institute. And they have a conference named the Religious Leaders Speaks. And they invited me once. I was the only person who is not dressed with religious stuff. And I discovered that there is a lot of issues, even between Christian and Jew. So the discussion even moved to conflictual discussion, where Muslims were not there. Then from that time, I was very concerned about this. Well, and one of my first readings, I hope you can find it. It was written in French, a scholar named Zimmerman. It was published in 1904, and he was talking about the disparities, the fundamental disparities between Muslims and Christians. And his interpretation that the issue is linguistic, no more than that. There is a problem in language, which means we Muslims, after 14th century, we lost some meanings. We still speak in Arabic for sure, but something is missing in the meaning. And for Christian, the same. I mean, the language by which, the book has come, is not the language we are using today in 2022. So this gap of language, we should to fix it. And when we will fix it, we can deal with those disparities, this misunderstanding, this intolerant interpretation of the relationship between different religions. Then, the last point I want to share, and this is even there is very cold, it's off, I hope so. In 2004, I was engaged with the government of Korea in dealing with the kidnapping of Kim. In Iraq by a religious group. And I went, I was at that time when I went to Seoul and we were discussing creating a crisis group. But what we have discovered that this group came to search for his name in Korean language, and they found that he was in a missionary action in Iraq. And they decided to kill him. So at that time, the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Korea was Ban Ki-moon, I remember. So they decided just to forget it. And the issue comes out again. And I was very surprised 4 years ago when Honorable Pope Francis came to Morocco. So he made a ceremony and he was speaking to his fellows. And it was a wonderful meaning. He was saying that you can bring people by your act. So recruitments or missionary is not verbal. And I love it. So those projects you were talking about, those project colleagues were talking about, to make a school, to contribute to peace, contribute to environment. You don't need to talk about religion, about the Christ, about Muhammad. Just your acts can be helpful. Thank you.
If we don't have any questions, I have a question myself. Mr. Rash, you mentioned that the Hungarian model is very effective when it comes to NGO work. And Mr. Azbej, you said that when it comes to the exportation of the Hungarian model to Middle Eastern countries, it is kind of difficult. I know it could be the topic of a whole other discussion, but could you elaborate on that? Why is that exactly? Why the export, both of you, if may?
There is an absolute truth that the model that the Hungarian government used depends upon the existence of a reliable, vetted local partner. The Middle East is a difficult environment, as is Africa, two areas where the Hungarian government is really working hard. And I think what separates their program from others is that they took time, and still do, as far as I can tell, in being very selective and serious about who they choose for their local partners. But once having done so, they trust them and empower them. But it's absolutely a thing that requires trusted local help. Because of the, I think the less structured and formal nature, if you will, of the Hungarian approach, and it allows their people to make those relationships in a way that some of the bigger countries are not able to do so. For instance, I'll speak to the US and UK model, very, very structured in terms, overly structured in many respects, in the manners in which they let their people interact with the local community in these conflict regions, primarily based on security concerns, but on some other concerns as well. And so what that does is it hampers the establishment of the relationships, for instance, that the Consul General from Hungary, C.G. Saba, had with us in the church. It was a game changer. He would come, have dinner with us, sit down with us, and was able to move in a much more free way than the U.S. or the U.K. representatives were. That's a big, complicated discussion. But I think to answer your question, it is a two-way street. It can work. It requires investment in terms of developing the human capital, the human relationships with the on-the-ground partners. And that only comes from spending time on the ground. A big issue for the Americans is because and I'm picking on the Americans because I am one. But the Americans, because Iraq, for instance, is still considered a conflict zone or was, the rotations for the State Department there and the aid personnel are generally 1 year. The first 2 months, they're getting ready for in the new place they are, that they're situated in. In the last 2 months, they're preparing to leave. And in the 8 months in between, they're allowed a handful of controlled movements within the country, highly orchestrated. Nobody really has a chance to say anything original or of substance in terms of new thought, in terms of collaborative thought. And it's a real difficulty in developing those relationships. And I think that's one of the reasons that this type of model is so difficult for countries like the US and the UK to develop.
Well, I guess if you are making a procedures, it will be legally founded, and you cannot give it to this group and you excluded another group. So what has happened in Morocco fighting violent extremism, we learned from some Arab countries that when the state is stepping back, is not feeling its responsibilities, mainly before the Arab Spring. We have the case of Egypt, when the Muslim Brotherhood filled the gap, and they were very active in non-state activities in welfare and so many. And of course, they controlled the public opinion. And it was a very dangerous game. In Morocco, what has been decided, even in the Religious Act, if I would like to build a mosque with my own money, I have no more the right. I should give this money to the ministry in charge, and they will build the mosque. So the charity financial action cannot anymore be a subject in anything related to religion. Religion should be neutral from this control. And of course, in sociology, you cannot tell me it's the will. There is no will. Money creates dependency. And to avoid this, you decide with rationality. All religions' actions should be neutral, should be secular, and it's the duty of the state. And this is how it was done in the Moroccan case. Today, we have no, even in the political campaign, it's by law that all political parties cannot use religion in their discourse. To keep it neutral, to keep it out of politics, out of money. And it was a successful story. That at least, well, we have some problems, but comparing to other, Arab countries where I guess the less, and this is because of this policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and also thank you for delivering these great presentations.